So, continuing this thought process of why a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is impossible, let's move on to the next scenario. Let's say China was successful in their amphibious landing against essentially impossible odds. Now, China holds the beachheads and the ports. So, now what? Well, they got to conduct operations into the interior and into the Taiwanese cities. But before they do that, they have to make sure their logistics and material is shored up and ready to go. You need that ready for any kind of sustained incursions into major cities and a long term invasion. And now, we'll see why tactics wins battles, but logistics wins wars. So let's take a look at how logistically difficult it will be for the Chinese military to sustain itself on Taiwan. Now let's assume the occupation force is 1 million troops. It might have to be higher, but 1 million is a nice round number to fully subdue and defeat the Taiwanese on their island. Now the first major logistics obstacle China runs into is the fact that everything they need for their assaults on these Taiwanese cities has to come across that same 100-mile stretch of ocean that they came across during their amphibious assault. Even uncontested, that is expensive and potentially dangerous outside of October and May because of the weather and the treacherousness of the waters. And as we saw with Russia, it can be difficult to plan for that type of logistics operation, even when you share a border with the enemy nation that you invaded. Remember their 70-kilometer long logistics debacles where convoys were dead in the water because they ran out of fuel? Yeah, logistics is hard. To maintain 1 million troops, China must supply 10 to 20 million tons of material monthly. Food alone requires 1,500 tons daily, or 3 million pounds based on a 3 pounds per soldier to meet their caloric needs in combat. Potable water, which is scarce in war zones, adds another 2 to 4 million gallons daily, which includes things like hygiene, cooking, just drinking water, etc. And all of that's going to weigh between 16,000 and 30,000 tons. That is, at least until they can get some tactical water purification up and running. Now, China doesn't publicly disclose its water purification capabilities, but if they're anything like the United States, which I doubt they are because the United States is a logistics juggernaut, they would need 100 to 150 continuously operating reverse osmosis water purification units, also known as ROPUs. Now, until China deploys these, gets them up and running, and shores up the logistics of getting that water from them to the front lines, they're going to be reliant on water shipped over the Taiwan Strait. Now, ammunition demands vary, but sustained offensives could require 1 to 2 million tons monthly, including artillery shells that weigh 50 to 100 pounds each, small arms rounds, and that weighs about 300 pounds per soldier over the course of the month. They would need medical supplies, spare parts, and engineering materials for fortifications, and that contributes another 1 to 2 million tons. Fuel requirements are colossal with 2 to 4 million barrels of oil daily, which equates to about 84 to 168 million gallons for naval, air, and ground operations, including a huge amount of fuel needed for a mechanized force if they were moving with tanks. China's strategic petroleum reserves of 500 to 700 million barrels could sustain these operations for about 4 to 6 months at 3 million barrels daily, but a US-led blockade, as I've talked about previously, would cut about 8 million barrels daily, leaving China with a 6 to 8 million barrel shortfall. And no, as I've said before, Russia cannot backfill that shortfall. Russia could not rely on scavenging for food because Taiwan already is only 30% self-sufficient when it comes to food, and this forces China to ship 1 to 1.5 million tons of food monthly for occupied populations, adding to the burden. Now, what kind of equipment do they need to ship over? Well, that's kind of a big deal. Many of their roll-on, roll-off, or ro-ro vessels are civilian ships, not hardened for combat, meaning they're far easier to sink. China does not have any Normandy-style ability to offload armored divisions without working ports. They're developing it, and we've seen some images of it, but it's not even remotely close to at scale for the type of invasion they would need here. So just getting the equipment to the soldiers is going to be problematic for the Chinese. Now, when it comes to medical logistics, and frankly, I think China's just going to let the wounded die because field hospitals and medical supply chains are a logistical nightmare in amphibious operations, but wounded soldiers would require evacuation, and they would have to cross back over the same deadly strait that they just came from. Without reliable medevac and trauma care, China could lose tens of thousands more to wounds that would have been survivable under better conditions. Now, when this takes place, it undermines morale, and it also strains logistics even more. So it's safe to say China will need a huge lift capability, both on the ocean and on the ground. China's 355 tactical cargo ships and 60 amphibious vessels can transport about 1 to 2 million tons per trip. This necessitates 5 to 10,000 ship crossings monthly to deliver that 10 to 20 million tons. So we're talking 200 to 400 ship crossings a day, non-stop. And this assumes, again, there's no sinking of ships en route. As I said in my previous video, each crossing takes 12 to 24 hours, exposing ships to Taiwan's Harpoon missiles, sea mines, and drones, which could sink 10 to 20 vehicles per wave, which disrupts 200,000 to 400,000 tons of supplies. Now, some may say, why don't they just use civilian ships? And they probably would, but here's the biggest problem. China could have the most incredible sea lift capability on Earth, but many of those ports that they would be landing on would be damaged or destroyed. If they use civilian ships, they can't offload onto a beach. That's not possible. They need a port. And if Taiwan's port system degrades below 50%, China doesn't have enough port capability to support its forces on Taiwan. Most assumptions about the war show there would be a 70 to 80% degradation in Taiwan's port system because they would be destroyed or damaged in the initial stages of the invasion, whether it's by China or by Taiwanese sabotage. So if that's the case, China would need to take the time to build them back up, and that's frankly time they don't have. Some may ask about aircraft. Well, airlift is grossly inadequate. It's grossly inadequate for pretty much all countries. If you look at the invasion into Iraq and Afghanistan, the vast majority of US lift was sea lift, not planes. And that's despite the fact that we have a massive amount of cargo planes. Now, China has 400 transport aircraft, primarily Y-20s, which are capable of delivering 20,000 to 40,000 tons daily via 2,000 to 4,000 sorties. That would be all good and well, but they would also be very vulnerable to Patriot and Skybow defenses. And even if they were perfect, it still only covers less than 1% of monthly needs for China. So in a best case scenario, it takes China 10 weeks to stabilize logistics for further incursions into Taiwanese cities, which gives Taiwan time to fortify them. Worst case, it takes 6 months to possibly never, which means because they can't get their logistics in line, their military collapses in Taiwan and must retreat. You have to understand the United States has the best military logistics in the world by far, and at its peak, it was sustaining 2 battlefields to the tune of 32 million tons of material in total at a pretty exorbitant cost. For China, the logistical cost of sustaining their forces in Taiwan alone and nowhere else around the globe would cost around 15 billion per month or 180 billion per year. China's total defense budget is 250 to 400 billion depending on how you calculate it. Their costs would simply be unsustainable. So yet again, this is another reason why China will not invade Taiwan, and I'm just going to keep finding these angles and talking about this until all of the doubters finally get it.